Welcome to the English Tales, where every story whispers a little magic and every word weaves a world of wonder. Settle in and let the tales begin. Today, listen to The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. Shylock was a wealthy man from the city of Venice. Usury was his primary occupation. He charged exorbitant interest rates from people. In this business, there was no one more ruthless and unjust than him. He determined the interest based on a person's need. His principle was that once the interest was set, there would be no leniency whatsoever. Due to this cruel behavior, he was infamous in the city of Venice. People not only spoke ill of him behind his back, but also didn't hesitate to insult him to his face. Shylock was a Jew, which further fueled the Venetians' hatred towards him. However, despite all this, Shylock did not care about what people thought. He claimed that he never forced anyone to borrow money from him. People came to him on their own. And what was wrong with charging some interest in return for helping the needy and assisting them in times of trouble? In Venice, there was also a Christian merchant named Antonio. He was highly respected by the people. Being a Christian, Antonio despised usury and stayed away from it. This was why he disliked Shylock so much, that he would openly speak harsh words to his face. Like Shylock, Antonio also lent money to people, but he never charged interest. His lending was solely for charity and to help those in distress. This made Shylock jealous of him, and he eagerly waited for the right opportunity to teach Antonio a lesson. Antonio had a loyal friend named Bassanio. One day, Bassanio came to meet Antonio. The two friends were meeting after a long time. Antonio embraced him warmly and gave him a hearty welcome. Afterward, he asked the reason for his visit. Bassanio spoke in a sorrowful tone. "My friend, there's an island not far from the city of Venice. A wealthy merchant lives there, and he has a daughter named Portia. I have known this merchant since childhood. I met Portia at his house, and gradually, we both fell in love with each other. A few days ago, the merchant passed away. Now, we both wish to get married. But there is an obstacle." "What kind of obstacle, my friend? Tell me clearly," Antonio asked eagerly. "My friend, before his death, the merchant transferred all his wealth to Portia. Now Portia is the sole heir to his vast fortune. She possesses immense wealth. Compared to her, I am a poor and penniless man. In such a situation, even thinking of marrying her feels like reaching for the stars. But I love her so deeply that I can't imagine living without her. That's why I have come to you. If you could lend me some money, I could marry Portia with honor." Bassanio revealed his heartfelt emotions. Antonio held Bassanio's hands in his own and said, "My friend, are you worried about such a small matter? As long as I am here, you don't need to worry. Tell me, how much money do you need? I will do everything I can to help you." "At least 3,000 ducats," Bassanio said hesitantly. 3,000 ducats. Antonio fell into deep thought. This amount wasn't a big deal for him, but at that moment, he had only 500 ducats on hand. All his wealth was tied up in trade. However, he was determined to help Bassanio, so he decided to borrow money from Shylock. Without delay, he took Bassanio along and went to meet Shylock. Shylock's experienced eyes immediately recognized the purpose of Antonio's visit. He had been waiting for this opportunity for years. His joy knew no bounds. With a cunning smile on his face, he said, "Well, Antonio, what brings you here today?" "Shylock, I need 3,000 ducats right now." Antonio replied. Shylock laughed and said, "Antonio, you've always opposed me, repeatedly insulted me in public, and called me vile names. But now you've come to me for help, so I will surely lend you the money. Since you despise interest, I will give you the loan without charging any. However, I have one condition." "Condition? What condition?" Antonio asked curiously. "If you fail to repay the loan within the agreed time, I will cut 1.5 pounds of flesh from any part of your body," Shylock stated coldly. Antonio was astonished. It was indeed a bizarre condition. However, he was confident that his ships, loaded with goods, would soon return to Venice, and he would be able to repay the debt well before the 3-month deadline. So, he accepted the condition without hesitation. Shylock immediately had a bond prepared, took Antonio's signature on it, and handed over the 3,000 ducats. Antonio gave all the money to Bassanio, and smiling said, "My friend, go quickly and marry Portia. Now nothing will stand in the way of your marriage." Bassanio had been observing the entire situation. Tears welled up in his eyes as he said, "My friend, I cannot marry by putting your life at risk." Antonio reassured him, saying, "Don't worry about me, Bassanio. My ships will return even before 3 months, and I will repay Shylock's debt in full. You go and marry Portia happily." In this way, Antonio convinced Bassanio and bid him farewell. A few days later, Bassanio married Portia. The two became lost in their love for each other and began living a blissful life together. One day, while Portia and Bassanio were sitting alone, sharing tender words of affection, a servant arrived and handed Bassanio a letter. Bassanio opened it and read, "Dear friend Bassanio, please forgive me for disturbing your joyful moments. Also, convey my apologies to Portia on my behalf. My friend, I must share some tragic news with you. The ships loaded with goods, on whose assurance I had taken the loan, have gone missing somewhere at sea. There is now no hope of their return or recovery. The deadline to repay Shylock is fast approaching. You know very well what will happen to me if I fail to repay the debt on time. But my friend, before I leave this world, I wish to see you one last time. This is my final request. I will wait for you anxiously. If possible, please come. Your friend, Antonio." As soon as Bassanio finished reading the letter, he was left stunned. The letter slipped from his hands and fell to the ground, tears streaming down his face. Seeing Bassanio in such distress, Portia became frightened. She quickly picked up the letter and read it, but she couldn't fully grasp the situation. She then looked at Bassanio with questioning eyes, seeking an explanation. Then Bassanio told Portia everything from the beginning to the end. With tears in his eyes, he said, "Because of me, Antonio's life is in danger. Today, he needs my help. I must leave for Venice immediately to save him." Hearing about Antonio's generosity, Portia's eyes also filled with tears. She said to Bassanio, "There are very few people in this world who would risk their lives for friendship. You must protect your friend. true friends are invaluable treasures in life. You should leave for Venice right away. I will pray to God for his safety." Without wasting any time, Bassanio set out for Venice. Portia was not only beautiful, but also wise and quick-witted. After Bassanio left, she, along with her maid, disguised themselves in men's attire and rode toward Venice on horseback. Meanwhile, in the court of Venice, Shylock and Antonio were present. Such an unusual case had never been heard or seen before. So it seemed as if the entire city of Venice had gathered in the courtroom. There was noise and tension all around. Antonio stood in the defendant's box with his head bowed in despair, while Shylock, holding the bond in one hand and a sharp knife in the other, glared at him with fierce eyes. Standing beside Antonio was Bassanio, overwhelmed with guilt. The court was still waiting for the judge, when suddenly, two handsome young men entered the courtroom. One of them handed a letter to a court official. The official opened the letter and began to read aloud. The letter said, "Honorable officers. Shylock, since Antonio has failed to repay the loan, as per the bond, you are entitled to cut 1.5 pounds of flesh from any part of his body. But," Portia paused deliberately, her sharp eyes fixed on Shylock, whose face lit up with malicious delight. The courtroom fell into complete silence, everyone holding their breath, eager to hear the next words. "But," Portia continued in a firm, authoritative voice, "the bond allows you to take exactly 1.5 pounds of flesh. No more, no less. Not even a hair's weight above or below. Also, the bond says nothing about shedding blood. So, if you shed even a single drop of Antonio's blood while cutting the flesh, your property and life will be forfeited under Venetian law." Shylock's triumphant smile faded instantly. His eyes darted nervously around the courtroom as murmurs of astonishment filled the hall. "Do you still wish to proceed, Shylock?" Portia asked sharply. Shylock's hands trembled. Realizing he had been outwitted, he tried to salvage the situation. "Fine. I will take my money instead of the flesh." Portia, maintaining her firm stance, replied, "I am afraid that's not possible. You have refused the money in front of the court, demanding justice according to the bond. Now, you must take exactly 1.5 pounds of flesh. Nothing more, nothing less. And without shedding a drop of blood." Defeated, Shylock's face turned pale. His own cruelty had trapped him. In a final attempt, he said, "Then let me leave with just my life." Portia responded coldly, "The laws of Venice state that for conspiring against the life of a citizen, your wealth will be seized. Half to the state and half to the aggrieved party, Antonio. As for your life, it is now at the mercy of the Duke." The Duke, moved by Antonio's plea for mercy, spared Shylock's life, but confiscated his wealth. The entire courtroom erupted in applause, praising the young judge's wisdom. Bassanio, unaware that the brilliant judge was none other than his own wife, watched in awe. Later, the truth was revealed, and Antonio, Bassanio, and all of Venice marveled at Portia's intelligence and courage. But what?" Shylock asked, unable to contain his excitement. "Shylock, mercy is greater than anything else. Even the law bows before mercy. If you believe in humanity and kindness, then forgive Antonio. In return, you can have as much money as you want." Shylock had been waiting for this day for months. He wanted to take revenge on Antonio, counting every grudge. So he roared, "My lord, I don't want money, I want justice." A deep silence spread across the courtroom. Everyone was stunned. No one had expected such behavior from Shylock. The crowd was filled with hatred and anger towards him. "Very well, Shylock," said the judge. "You will certainly get justice. You may cut exactly 1.5 pounds of flesh from Antonio's body." Bassanio rushed to Antonio, hugged him tightly, and cried, "My friend, it is because of me that you are in this situation. I will never be able to forgive myself for this." Antonio consoled him, saying, "No, my friend, this is not your fault. It's all a play of fate. And besides, giving my life for you brings me immense joy." Saying this, he embraced Bassanio. The heartfelt bond between the two friends brought tears to everyone's eyes. A wave of sorrow and compassion swept through the courtroom. The emotional scene even melted the hearts of the coldest souls. Meanwhile, Shylock, holding a knife, moved towards Antonio. Just as he was about to strike, the judge's stern voice echoed through the courtroom. "Stop, Shylock! The bond mentions only the flesh. Remember, if even a single drop of Antonio's blood is spilled while cutting, you will be sentenced to death." Shylock's hand froze mid-air. He stared at the judge with wide, shocked eyes. "What are you staring at, Shylock? Go ahead and do your work," Portia said in a firm voice. Thinking, "If any blood is spilled, I will be sentenced to death." Shylock broke into a cold sweat. He threw the knife aside and pleaded, "My lord, I release Antonio. In return, please give me back my money." Portia spoke again. "Shylock, I gave you an opportunity, but you refused money and insisted on Antonio's flesh. Therefore, the verdict cannot be changed now. Pick up the knife and cut the flesh without spilling a single drop of blood. If you refuse to follow the court's decision, all your property will be confiscated. Have mercy on me, please." "I will be ruined," Shylock begged, falling to his knees. One who knows no mercy and values no humanity will never receive the gift of mercy. However, if Antonio wishes, he may choose to forgive you." Shylock turned to Antonio and folded his hands, begging for forgiveness. Antonio then said, "I forgive all his offenses. But his property should be seized and handed over to his daughter, whom he disowned and cast out. If he agrees to this condition, he shall be pardoned." Shylock bowed his head in agreement. Antonio was then set free. Bassanio, filled with joy, embraced Antonio warmly. However, he still hadn't recognized that the judge was actually Portia in disguise. Bassanio approached the judge and requested her to accept the 3,000 ducats as a token of gratitude. But Portia refused the money and instead asked Bassanio for his ring, a ring that Portia had given him as a symbol of her love. The ring was dearer to him than his own life. However, overwhelmed with joy at having saved his friend's life, he gave the ring to her. After this, Portia, along with her maid, departed for home. A few days later, Bassanio and Antonio also arrived at the estate. There, Portia asked Bassanio about the ring. He became nervous. Then, smiling, Portia placed the ring back into Bassanio's hand. Seeing the ring, both friends were astonished. Portia then revealed how she had disguised herself as a man to plead the case in court. Just then, one of Antonio's servants arrived with the news. "Master, all your ships have been found." Thus, joy and happiness spread all around with this wonderful news. Thank you for joining us on this journey through words and wonder. Until our next tale, stay curious and keep dreaming.